All right. Well, welcome back. All right. So today we're going to talk about your central nervous system, basically your brain and your spinal cord. Now, I am going to break this down into a lot more detail, very simplified detail for everybody. But I want to talk about basic functions of the brain. Now, your brain is divided into quadrants. You've probably heard of the frontal lobe. You might have heard of the parietal lobe, the occipital lobe, and the temporal lobe. So your frontal lobe is this part of your brain. Your parietal lobe is right over here. Your temporal lobe is here, and your occipital lobe is right back here. And I put this on Facebook so everybody can see. There's a nice little drawing here, and here's your cerebellum, and here is the spinal cord. So here's the cerebellum and the spinal cord. So let's talk about the frontal lobe. The frontal lobe is who you are as a human being. It's your prefrontal cortex. There's a whole bunch of stuff. We're going to divide that up. It is who you are as a human being. It's your focus. It's your attention. It's your concentration. Your executive function. How do you decide? How do you make judgments about what you're going to do and what you want to do? As I get up here and I speak and I move my hands and I turn and I look at the camera, I make that decision. That's the decision of my frontal lobe. Now, your frontal lobe has something called your motor cortex in it. So all action, all thought of action starts in your frontal lobe. It's who you are as a human being. That's also your ability to inhibit negativity, to inhibit depression. When your frontal lobe goes, people get depressed. And you can't control your thoughts, you can't control your emotions. You can't control, you lose your willpower, we'll say that. And there's another thing about the frontal lobe is that's your motivator. That's where you get your energy, that's where you get your motivation. You get up, get outside, get inside, and get something done. So if you're having problems with focus, attention, concentration, frontal lobe. If you find yourself saying stupid stuff, no, not like that. That's right. That's more the indirect basal ganglia. But if you say stupid stuff, or you just, you don't control, you can't control yourself. That's your frontal lobe. If you just have no motivation, no energy, I just don't feel like doing anything. That's usually the frontal lobe. And the very first sign that your brain and your nervous system is going down the tubes is you fatigue. You lose that endurance. That's a whole other subject. And then there's your parietal lobe right up into here. Now your parietal lobe is what we like to call basically your sensory cortex. That's where you feel stuff. So if I touch your hand, you don't feel it in your hand. You feel it in your parietal lobe. Your parietal lobe is in charge of light touch, vibration, pain, temperature. It is also used for vision. It is the part that is the part of your brain that you decide where things are at. When you see something, you must figure out that you're seeing something. That's actually your occipital lobe. We'll go to that in just a second. That's just for vision, for raw vision. But an impulse is made, and your parietal lobe tells you where it is in space and time. It also tells you where you are in space and time. So if you're walking by something, you keep bumping the same part of your body, you keep injuring the same part of your body, that is actually a problem with your parietal lobe. And we're going to get into that a lot deeper as time goes on too. Then you have your temporal lobe. Now your temporal lobe, that is in charge of smelling, your smell sensations in through here. That is in charge of hearing. That is in charge of tasting. That is in charge of, when you look at things, what is it? What am I looking at? That's a pen. Like my parietal lobe tells me where it is. It's up over there. My temporal lobe tells me what it is. My occipital lobe allows me to see it. That connects with my eyes. And so those are basic functions of your brain. Now your temporal lobe, you have a problem with this, short-term memory. Speech problems are a combination between your temporal lobe and your frontal lobe. So there's also other areas in between that are connected. that we're going to talk about in some detail so people can understand things. But we just want to today touch on the central nervous system. And then there's your cerebellum. Now your cerebellum, that is in charge of coordinating movement. That is in charge of taking sensory input from your spinal cord and your body and telling your brain where things are at and what speed they're moving and what if they're moving or not and where you're going. Because if I want to touch the finger to my nose, it's actually little bits of movements coordinated by my cerebellum, otherwise my arm goes way over here. All right? It's also in charge of cognition, because an action, digestion is an action. Wiggling my fingers is an action. Smelling something is an action. Thinking, cognition, is an action. And this is in charge of coordinating those actions. And it's a very, very important thing. Your spinal cord is in charge of letting your brain tell your fingers to wiggle. Your spinal cord is in charge of telling your brain your fingers are wiggling. Your spinal cord has all these nerves that go out to your heart, your lungs, your liver, your big toe, your thumb. Your spinal cord is made up of all these nerves, and this is your central nervous system. Your spinal cord is not separate of your brain. These are not separate things. There's all those folds, and those the grooves are called sulci, the lumps are called gyruses or gyri. So sulci and gyri. You have your lateral sulcus, your central sulcus, and your parietal occipital and temporal occipital sulcus. And then you have the longitudinal fissure in through here, that big gap between the two sides. And so that's all just anatomy stuff. But the most important thing is these things work together. For instance, Pam decides she wants to wiggle her fingers. That is actually this part of her brain here. Okay, now another part of her brain says, you know, we've wiggled our fingers like this before. This is, you have your motor, you have your prefrontal cortex right in through here. Come back a little bit, we have our association cortex of our frontal lobe. That says, okay, we've done this before. And then you have your motor cortex, and that says, do it. Sends an impulse down in through here, and it goes to the basal ganglia thalamus, and information is being sent to the cerebellum to tell you where your fingers are at. You can't wiggle your fingers if you don't know where they're at. Mm-hmm. If they're high, they need to go low. If they're low, they need to go high. No, you're not going to go higher. Mm-hmm. So you want to do this, know where your fingers are at. So your parietal lobe tells your frontal lobe where your fingers at. What are your fingers feeling? Is there something blocking your fingers? And so there's a big coordination through there, and then the information gets down to the spinal cord, and you wiggle your fingers, coordinated by the cerebellum. Now, deep in the brain is the on-off switch called the basal ganglion. We will get to that stuff. We're just trying to make it nice and simple so you have a great idea. Your central nervous system, your brain, and your spinal cord are one thing. They're not separate. Now remember, and I talked about this the last time, your brain is protected by complete bone, your skull. Your spinal cord is protected by 24 movable bones, and then your sacrum.
Right.
So these are the only organs that are completely surrounded by bone. Your heart is not, my intestines are not.
Right.
It's the only thing surrounded by bone, so it is the first organ in your body to get organized and be created. Mm-hmm. Your brain and your spinal cord are the first thing that happen in your body. They're protected by bone, so they must be the most important thing. That is your central nervous system. So what is a great exercise for your central nervous system? And I'm going to tell you two. And the first one will be very familiar with what we said last week. To get started. That's the first thing. That's the most important thing, is to get started. And the best way to get started is to set aside a time of the day, first thing in the morning, last thing at night, middle of the day, a time of the day that is for you. Now this is your time. That's the most important thing about it. This is an investment. It doesn't cost time. It gives you time. Mm-hmm. You are investing in yourself, and I tell this to people, the most important thing you can invest in, the best investment, is yourself, your family, and your kids. There's nothing that you can invest in to get a better return on investment, period. Because I know a lot of rich people that are sick, and I know, and if they were healthy, they'd be a little happier, but that's a whole other subject. All right, and so first thing, find the time, make the time, come up with that morning routine. I'm up at 4 o'clock in the morning, Monday through Thursday. I'm not up at 4 o'clock in the morning on the weekends, but Monday through Thursday, 4 o'clock, and I love it. And it's my time. It's an investment. And I had a thought today. It's not about the work put in, it's an investment in my future. And everybody knows if you're investing in your future, you're taking time, you're being thankful, you're thanking God, you're focusing on your blessings, your life's going to get better. And that's how you become a better person. But you have to get started. The next exercise is what I like call planking. Now planking is awesome exercise for the midline of the cerebellum and will help you with your posture. And planking can start like this. Leaning against the counter. You don't have to get on the floor. And the camera's not set up so that I can get on the floor.
Well, I can't either.
You don't have to get on the floor to plank. This is planking because you're engaging all that core. When you engage the core, you engage the cerebellum. You engage the back of your brain. And while you're planking, stare at something. When you stare at something, you are engaging your frontal lobe. And if you focus on smelling the air, that's your temporal lobe. If you focus on what the counter feels like, that's your parietal lobe. Then just looking at the counter, looking at something, that's your occipital lobe. So you're engaging your whole brain. And so planking is one of the best exercises. And so 30 seconds, and just lean against something like this. Something solid that's not going to move, by the way. And on the ground, I prefer to do it.
Can you use it?
You can use a wall.
Okay. Because I'm trying to think of what I have.
You could do a wall like this.
Okay.
Right? Just a little. You'll feel it in through here. And you want to know how you're doing a good job? This starts to shake. That's how you know you're doing a good job. And that also tells you that part of your brain is weak. Anytime you do an exercise, as a side note, you first have to build up the tissue in the brain that coordinates that and controls that area before the tissue in your body will heal. You've got to repair, you've got to build up that area of your brain. That's my alarm saying we've got 15 minutes in, so I've got to end this real quick. We'll let that go through. When you start exercising, the first thing you work is your brain, and then that'll send impulses to your body to heal. So planking is a great exercise. A safe planking, something safe, something easy on the ground. I go on my forearms. I don't try to go on the cement with nails and get cut open.
Right.
So making it safe is the most important thing. And start out with 10 seconds.
Yeah.
Work your way up to 30-second intervals. And if you can do 30 seconds really good, then you need to change the angle.
Okay.
Okay? The ultimate planking would be on a Bosu ball. And so that's very advanced. But just start. Start and planking. And just look up videos on YouTube about planking. But make sure it's something that you can do. That's the most important thing. So I want to thank you for our Build a Better Brain workshop. Next week we're going to go into more the peripheral nervous system. We're just going to introduce you to the systems of the nerves. Then we're going to talk about nerve action. We've got a big plan. By the way, in the mornings, I always try to put out the flyer for what I'm going to talk about today on Facebook. The videos, we're still editing them, so they might be a little bit behind them, but you'll be able to find the flyer, the original flyer, on Facebook. So thank you very much. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, like us on Facebook, tell all your friends, because we're doing this for you. God bless you. Have an awesome day. Thank you.